When kids just won't listen, parents often feel stuck between two choices: to give in or get angry. It's exhausting. We give you the top techniques directly from the experts, helping you on your path to a more peaceful, respectful, and joyful life with your kids. All right, today's show is all about getting kids to listen and talk from an expert who knows best. She's a speech pathologist by the name of Celeste Roseberry-McKibbin. She received her Ph.D. from Northwestern University and is now a professor of communication sciences and disorders at California State University, Sacramento. Dr. Roseberry-McKibbin is also currently a part-time itinerant speech pathologist in the San Juan Unified School District, where she provides direct services to students from preschool through high school. Dr. Roseberry-McKibbin's primary research interests are in the areas of assessment and treatment of culturally and linguistically diverse students with communication disorders, as well as service delivery to students from low-income backgrounds. She has over 70 publications, including 16 books, and has made over 370 presentations at the local, state, national, and international levels. She is a fellow of the American Speech and Hearing Association and winner of their Certificate of Recognition for Special Contributions in Multicultural Affairs. She received the National Presidential Daily Point of Light Award for her volunteer work in building literacy skills of children in poverty. Celeste is such a rich resource of information. In this interview, she mentions her 3 steps on getting young kids to listen, how she gets teenagers to listen, the importance of reading in speech and language development, where parents can get information about typical language development, and why anger does not work, as well as some tips on how to develop young kids' communication skills. At the very end of the show, she also talks briefly about her experience living in Manila in the Philippines and leaves us with an inspiring personal story about her son and how they were able to work through his learning difficulties. Let's hear from Celeste. Here we go. Celeste Roseberry-McKibbin, welcome to Getting Kids to Listen. Thanks for joining us today.
That's a pleasure. I'm honored to be invited.
Great. What do you love most about working with kids?
You know, I've thought a lot about that. I think a lot of it, James, is that most of them, pretty innocent and open to you, and they love, for me, I feel like they love me for who I am, not for how I look or how many pieces of paper I have on my wall. And I love that with the right techniques, you really can influence children. They're open. They're not hardened yet, like a lot of, older folks.
Yeah, feel the same way. And you've been working with them you work with a lot of different ages. Is there a main thing that you would say you've learned from working with kids?
In terms of, what I've learned from working with kids, yes. I think that it's very important to have a balance of love and firm boundaries. That's just the biggest thing. And I think that as I think about getting kids to listen, getting kids to do what we want, that we tend to either go on, too strict and too firm of boundaries without love, or we can be very loving but very permissive, and neither one works. So I think one reason why I've been blessed to be really effective as a professor and a clinician and even a mom is just that real balance of love and very firm boundaries.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And we can be good at it in one area and then slips our mind in another area, I feel like. So it's not just personality type, for example, but it's kind of applying it everywhere.
Yeah, definitely.
Tell us about your work as a speech language pathologist. What is that, and what ages are you working with, and where Where, how, what does it look like?
Okay, so yeah, so I'm of course a full-time university professor, and I teach, usually about 200 students a semester, and then but I'm only on campus Monday through Thursday. So every other Friday, I go into the public schools and I work with preschool, elementary, and teenage young men. So I just wanted to throw this out. I know, James, that we're going to talk about resources, but the American Speech and Hearing Association, ASHA, has a lot of good information. I just want to make a plug. ASHA.org is a great place to go
Okay.
in terms of what we do. So my job in the schools, I start off my Friday. What it looks like is I drive to a safe school, and I work with teenage young men, sex offenders who they commit the offenses, they're put in juvenile hall, and then they get out and they live in group homes. And then they come to school at this safe school called Gateway, and it's in Roseville, California, outside of Sacramento. So if they have speech or language therapy needs, then I work with them at the safe school one-to-one. And a lot of people, and I can say more about that, later, I really love working with this population. I know that a lot of people don't like that, but they're wonderful kids who've had a very hard upbringing and a lot of things done to them. So what I love about the school is I'm part of a team of psychologists, teachers, social workers who really work for rehabilitation. And it's really about restorative justice, where we're trying to give a lot of love, boundaries, education, so that they don't offend again after they turn 18, and so that they have a bright future. So that's where I start off my day. And then after that, I drive to an elementary school, and I work with a little bit with preschool, but mainly kindergarten through fifth grade with children with speech and language problems. So sometimes it could be a child who stutters. It could be a child with a voice disorder. It could be a child who has trouble saying their sounds, like the wed wabbit wan across the street. So they might have trouble with one sound, or they might be very hard to understand. There's those kinds of kids. And then there's also children with language and literacy problems. We call it language impairment, where they have difficulty comprehending and expressing language in both oral and written form. So I work with those kinds of kids as well. And all of my kids are living in a lot of poverty. I don't do much work with middle class or upper class, mainly, again, children from environments of poverty.
Okay. And you said that it's one school you're going to do the when you're working with the elementary age kids?
Yeah, well, it's one or two schools. Usually I'm at one school, it's called Grand Oaks Elementary. Once in a while, I will go to a different school to help out the therapist there, to kind of maybe see kids for therapy while she gets caught up on paperwork. But usually it's just it's the boys' safe school, and then the one elementary school, the K through 5.
Do you work with the kids one on one? Are they sitting across the table from you, or is it in a group setting?
Oh, what a good question. James, it's usually in a group setting. Most of us speech pathologists in the public schools do see kids in groups because our caseloads are so heavy. We can do a little individual work. My school is pretty small, so once in a while I'm able to do individual, but mainly it's in groups of 2 or 3 or 4. That would be a lot more typical.
Hmm. Two or three or four. So I'm wondering if they're. I'm just trying to imagine what kind of challenges come up. You can tell me what goes on in a group of two or three or four that you end up having to deal with.
Okay, well, in terms of listening and behavior and all of that, groups, okay, well, there's one or two good aspects to groups, and that is if a child is one-to-one with you and they're not complying and not listening and doing what you tell them, you can always pay attention to the other kids, and then the kid who's getting ignored because of his bad behavior wants in on it. So I think there can be a good aspect of the social pressure of having other children. Now, let's say you've got a group of four, there's issues of keeping the kids all focused and all attentive on the same activity and trying to manage different problems. So let's say that one child in your group of four is a person who stutters, another child can't read and write, another child just has a problem with the R, and another kid has problems with S and TH. You're really multitasking and using one or two or three activities to try to address all those needs. So it can get pretty complicated. The other thing, of course, is managing behavior. And whenever you're ready, I can get into that because I've been thinking a lot about it in terms of kids listening and paying attention and doing what we ask. But there's group dynamics where, again, children complying can be a definite issue.
Yeah, I'm ready to get into that. I do have one quick question about the kids you're working with. Is it common, or do these kids also have hearing impairments?
Okay.
Does that go along with it?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking, James. So yeah, I was trying to think, if we want kids to listen, if I want my son to listen, people's children, the kids on my caseload, the number one thing that it's really easy to overlook is hearing impairment.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. A lot of kids are born with normal hearing, right? My son was, but he had a lot of middle ear infections. And the thing with middle ear infections is the child will get a fever, okay? And then you give them antibiotics. So the fever goes away, but there's fluid that stays in the middle ear and makes it very, very hard for them to hear. And that's invisible. So a lot of parents don't know that their kid, James, it's a little bit like if you put your fingers in your ears right now when I was talking, what you would hear would be very muddled, right?
Right.
So children are often, my son was walking around with fluid on the middle ear and no one knows about it. So my son had that, and we had to actually get something called pressure equalizing tubes to drain the fluid. So
Huh.
I always caution parents to be aware. So we want to be sure that they can hear, absolutely number one. And in the schools, the person who tests hearing is the school nurse. We have a whole field of audiology in my profession where they do hearing testing and all of the treatment.
Interesting. Um, and another quick thing about hearing loss or hearing impairment. Do you see hearing loss at elementary ages? Does that happen? I've been in some environments where, you know, I'm bringing earplugs, I'm plugging my ears, and I see 2-year-olds way closer to the speakers than I am. Um, does that happen at that age?
It can. And one of the things that's really tough, I think, in our society is all the loud music and different things. Yeah, children can get hearing loss from being exposed to too much loud noise, and that can happen really early. I'm probably the most worried about young teenagers and young adults with their headphones,
Mm.
because if they have it too loud, they get what we call sensory neural hearing loss, and that is permanent. You cannot get that back. And so they end up wearing hearing aids at younger and younger ages. So yeah, noise exposure is a huge concern to me and to my whole field. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Hmm. Okay, well, yeah, let's get into some of the behavior stuff. And I don't want to divert, away from where you specialize, which is speech and language. So um, maybe you can talk about ways that's related with behavior, if it is. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Okay, so as we discussed before, as a speech language pathologist, of course, I treat kids with disabilities. So that's a whole different kettle of fish than typically developing children. But there are strategies that work across the board. So, James, let me talk about special needs kids first in terms of how to modify our language for them so that they'll listen and comprehend. And then I can get into behavior management, if that
All right.
sounds good.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so we make sure, step one is to make sure kids can hear us. And then step two, and this is going to sound really funky, but we've got to get their attention. And as a speech pathologist, I'm very aware of this. We need to get, a lot of parents make the mistake of yelling across the room, hey, Johnny, turn that down, and the kids aren't even attending to them. So we need to get right up their level. So if I'm working with a small child, I'll squat down, make sure I'm eye to eye with them and that they're really paying attention to me and focusing on me. So make sure they can hear, make sure that they're paying attention is it critical. And then, James, I see a lot of parents who don't know about typical language development in children and their expectations are way too high. Okay, so for example, I don't want to get boring here, but if we look at normal language development, the average child says their first word at around 12 months of age when they turn 1. Typically, by the age of a year and a half, they will be saying 50 words and then starting to combine words into short phrases, right? More juice, stuff like that. And I think what I see is parents get very frustrated because they expect more of the child than the child is capable of. So as I was preparing for today, I was standing in Target one time in line, and there was a family in front of me. There was a little girl in the basket and a mom and a dad and a sibling. And so the little girl was super cute. So I said to the mother, oh, how old is she? And she said, oh, she's a year and a half old. So I thought to myself, okay. So the little girl was saying like, potty, mommy, potty. And the mom was really angry. Don't you just do that. You talk to me in a whole sentence. I'm not going to take you to the, and I'm sitting there just trying not to say anything, but that little girl is not capable of saying a sentence. So I think that a cause of frustration for a lot of parents is they're expecting too much of their children. And so one of the things we can talk about in terms of resources at the end of this is where parents can get information about typical language development. I think that's really helpful. And then another mistake I see, and this is parents of children with like speech and language problems. Very commonly, James, these kids cannot carry out more than 1 or 2 commands at a time. And over my career, I've seen a lot of parents frustrated. Well, he is so bad. He doesn't listen. He's disobedient. So I'll say, okay, can you give me an example? So here's some 5-year-old with a language impairment who can't process more than 1 or 2 directions. Pick up the cup and take a sip of water. So that's kind of what they can handle, right? But the parents from yelling across the room while they're on their phone, usually, okay, I need you to eat your breakfast and then go brush your teeth and then get dressed and bring your backpack to the car. And that child cannot process that many directions at one time. So again, I think that people need to make sure their child can hear, get down at their level, get their attention, and then make sure that the child comprehends. It's funny because I see in typical child development books, the advice to parents is don't repeat yourself. And I agree with that to an extent, but with children with special needs, honestly, a lot of times they do need to hear things twice or even 3 times. So get down there, get their attention and say it once, and then have them repeat back. What did mommy just tell you? Or what did Miss Celeste just tell you? Then they repeat it back. If they don't get it, then we say it again.
Going back to the expectations we have for what a child is able to verbalize, I find it interesting that, we want to make sure that we don't have too high of expectations of what they can put together. But I also hear that when we're speaking to them, that they can understand a full sentence even if they can't put it together. So I can imagine that, being difficult you want to, I don't know what the word is when you're kind of speaking a little bit above their level, whatever that's called, and yet not expecting it back from them.
Okay, so
Or am I way off there?
No, you're great. So I think maybe what we're talking about is their ability to comprehend. Yeah, and you're absolutely on track, James. So usually children's ability to comprehend is greater than what they're able to express. And thinking about parents, and I am a mother, and my son had a lot of special needs. He's doing great now, and I can talk more about him later. But he did have the middle ear infections. He did have dyslexia. He does have ADHD. So um, again, I've kind of been there as a parent. So we're sort of back to making sure that they can comprehend what we're telling them. And most parents know if their children understand or not. I think, if you ask any parent, particularly any mom, even if the child has substantial special needs, they know when the child is comprehending and choosing to ignore it versus when the child doesn't get it. You're able to tell. I know how subjective that is, but talk to any mom and I think she'll agree with me.
Yeah, yeah. So we're making sure that they can hear properly or to the appropriate level that's not impaired. Um, is that something that's, I mean, it was being tested when I was a kid in public schools and at pretty early ages, so I'm assuming that's still something that, is it something that parents need to go out of their way to get extra hearing tests, or is that kind of
Yeah, what a
handled?
Yeah, what a good question. Yeah, back in the day when I started in the field a long time ago, we routinely screened children's hearing. I think it was like in kindergarten, second grade, and fifth grade, right? With budget cuts, at least in California, I can't speak for other places, but to my knowledge, that's pretty much gone. Like in
Hmm.
California, we don't do it in the schools at all. If a teacher suspects a hearing loss, usually he or she can refer to the school nurse. In California, that's who does that. And then the school nurse would then maybe make a recommendation to a parent to take the child to a pediatrician. So it's pretty sad. I feel that a lot of hearing problems go undetected because unless you have a super alert parent or teacher, especially if the hearing loss is mild, they're not going to notice it. And that kid could go on for years without
Yeah.
anyone detecting a problem.
I'm really surprised that's something that would be cut. I mean, nothing really surprises me with politics and governments, but I mean, maybe I'm not remembering it accurately, but I feel like I remember it took all of a minute to test a kid's hearing and didn't seem like needed too much specialized equipment or anything. They just had the little tape recorder and a person pushing the button. Um, I guess I don't know. If I have a question about that, but I guess you would be an advocate of bringing that back, huh?
Oh, yes. So I myself am a school certified audiometrist, which is just a little additional kind of certificate that you can get. So to test a child, you put the headphones on them and hopefully you have good quiet conditions. And with a cooperative child, it usually takes less than 5 minutes, to get something. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate of bringing hearing testing back. And I'm very sad that that went away. I think, again, I don't mean to be depressing, but I think we're missing a lot. So I think parents have to be aware, and so do teachers, so does everybody. Is the child hearing or not? And then the pediatrician would be the one to, refer to an audiologist to do testing. So we're assuming that people even have health insurance, which we know many of them don't. So it can be a real uphill climb for sure.
I have another question about the um, when you talk about kind of getting a kid's attention, and you were mentioning getting on their level, getting close to them. It's something we've covered it quite a bit, in this podcast. But I'm curious about the teenagers you work with. I'm assuming there's a somewhat of a different approach there, or is it just more subtle and still the same proximity and eye contact type of stuff?
Okay, so are we talking now about my teenage young men, about like if they're giving me attitude and not wanting to do what I want? Is that kind of thing?
Well, just in the steps you're outlining, where how important it is to start by even getting a kid's attention in the first place. And I'm wondering, with that population,
Okay, yeah, very good. Because yes, with some 5-year-old, probably Candyland is going to work really well.
right?
With my teen young men, I think I've been working with them for about 8 years now. You know how time flies. And this is so basic, I apologize. But James, the biggest thing I find with them is I have to find out what they're interested in and what they care about and really cater to that. With the children I work with, I'll say again that the kind of the preschool through fifth grade, they're a lot easier to please. With my teenage young men, I've served them ages 13 through 18. And you have to really focus in on what they want. So you have to do it to an extent with kids. But again, with the teenagers, tend not to be real motivated unless I'm speaking their language. So I can tell you a quick story. One of the young men I worked with, I'll call him Sammy, was deaf and had cochlear implants. And he had, these kids usually have a huge string of offenses. They've been abused themselves. And so they have kind of a long uphill climb with us as a rehabilitation team. But Sammy, he used American Sign Language for the first 10 years of his life, and he didn't even speak till he was 10. He lived in a really remote area of Northern California. So when I inherited him, he was 15 and very hard to understand. And so I was working on a lot of things, helping him to be more easy to understand. His reading was low, his writing was low, his spelling and everything. So the key to being successful with him is finding out what he wanted. And so I found out that he really loved mechanics. And so I said, okay. So his behavior was kind of fluctuating. There were some attitude problems in class. So I got out my iPad and I showed him this one school, San Juan High School. He wanted to be mainstreamed into auto shop for part of the day at this typical high school, again, with his background. So I said, okay, Sammy, I want you to look at pictures of this. It's a beautiful school. This is what it looks like. His teacher actually drove him over there to look at it. Now, if you want to get to auto shop in this high school, what choices do you need to be making today? Oh, I need to do my homework. Uh-huh. Oh, need not to talk back to the teacher. Okay, there's that also. Another young man I just finished seeing this semester, very, very sweet, cleft palate, and really messing around at the group home, not complying with orders. And so right before COVID-19 hit and, everything, we couldn't see the kids anymore for the rest of the school year, we had a really good discussion, and it's called Trip to the Future. I said, Tristan, you know how much I care for you, but I understand that you're messing around at the group home, not doing your homework, not practicing your speech. I said, what do you want to be when you leave high school? And he said, well, I'd like to be a nurse. I said, okay. And how much money do you want to make every year? So, James, we just made this list on the whiteboard, okay? And we looked it up online. Nurses make $70,000 a year. Okay, very good. How are you going to make better choices today to get where you want to go? So that was Tristan. Now back to Sammy, the young man with the cochlear implants. I really geared the therapy toward his motivation of becoming a mechanic. And he now is in community college studying to be a diesel mechanic. And I'm really proud of him. He's walking straight and narrow. When the barriers lift on COVID-19, we're going to have him to our house for dinner because I want to keep motivating him. But for both Sammy and Tristan, as these teenage young men, the key was finding out, what do you want to be in the future? What kind of nice life do you want? What kind of salary do you want to make? Okay, what are you doing today that is getting you toward that bright future? What are you doing today that is destructive and not advancing you toward your goals? So, and there's lots of other stories with that. But again, just finding out what they want and helping them figure out how to get it is
Nice.
critical.
So that's like goal setting, kind of a goal setting exercise.
Yeah, absolutely, because many of these young men have grown up in homes of poverty. And one of the things that is common. Not every family experiencing poverty has this, but there's a lack of vision because of just the despair and the hopelessness. And so for many of the young men I work with, no one has ever sat down with them and given them the big picture for their life. They just see a life like their families had. No one has talked to them about college. No one has said, what do you want to do? No one has shown them the steps to get that. And so I'm not blaming anybody. Families, especially these days, I believe are surviving and doing the best they can to put food on the table and a roof over everyone's head. But what these kids aren't getting is someone to instill them with a sense of hope and a sense that they can influence their future by making good choices now. There's a really good book that I brought to show, and I'm sure you've probably heard of it. It's Carol Dweck's book. It's called The Growth Mindset. Boy, this is just has been life-changing for me. And these are the principles that I use with children and with my young men. It's about perseverance, and you can do it, and hard work can make a difference.
Yeah, that's a great book, isn't it?
Yes. Have you read it?
I have read it. It's been some years. And I feel like I'm familiar with the work, but I hesitate to recommend that book only because I can't remember if it's much of a difficult read or not. So I haven't handed out many copies.
Okay.
But it must not, considering how popular it is, it must not be too dense and
No, I think she does a
technical.
really good job of telling stories. And even when she describes research, it's very understandable. So yeah, I have shared this with a lot of people. So anyway, yeah, it's very well written. And she actually did a revision. The original came out in 2006, and this came out again in 2016, kind of expanded and updated. And I feel like the second edition is even better than the first one in terms of real practical how-to advice.
Everything that you're mentioning, we're going to put in the show notes. So I appreciate that. Back to the younger kids, I just had another question. Let's say you just have a typical family and they have a typical 2-year-old, they're not noticing any delays or impairments in speech or anything, or a newborn. What do you recommend just for everyone are there practices or rituals, or how do you recommend that families just stay on top of the speech development?
Oh, okay. What a good question. Yeah, because it's not like families get educated in that. I would say going to resources like asha.org, just, talking to their pediatrician. Most pediatricians have lists of milestones. In my book, which I still need to send to you when I get your address, I
Right.
have those lists of milestones. But I think the most important thing is for parents to get lists of typical milestones and just have those around.
And is there anything that and I'm asking, I really don't know. I mean, how important is reading bedtime stories? How important is, the amount that we're communicating? And are there any kind of general recommendations you have around that?
Yes, absolutely. So, for a lot of years, we've all heard the advice talk to your child, right? Everyone's heard that. So, I call it the waterfall of words. Research used to say, okay, the more you talk to the child, the better. But that's only half the equation. The other half of the equation, there's research in both the US and Sweden to say that we need to respond immediately to our children. And the research is just right there. So, the child says to you something like, cup, mommy. And let's say I'm just going to grab my phone for a
Okay.
sec. So this is mostly what I see. This happened in a restaurant. I was sitting at Denny's and there was a family with a young child. And the kid, I think he was like 2 or 3 years old, and his crayons fell on the floor. And crayons, mommy, crayons. And the mom sat there ignoring and ignoring and ignoring. And finally, after the fifth or sixth time he said it, she goes, oh, it'll be okay. And then they kept talking, kept being on their phones, and they left the restaurant without ever, attending to their child. So what here's what we want to avoid. Okay, we want to avoid stuff like that. Or the child says, cup, mommy, cup. Cup, mommy. Oh, yeah. Okay, here you go. That was a delayed response on my part. Why? Because I was on my phone. And a lot of times parents are legitimately busy. The very best thing when parents are able to do it, and being a mom, I know it's not always, but is to respond right away. So the child says, cup, mommy, cup. Oh, you want the cup? Here it is. And look, I see Elsa on there from Frozen. So we want to talk to our children. We want to respond immediately whenever possible. And then the third big thing that's really easy to do in any language, no matter how busy you are, is we want to extend or add words to what the child said. So the kid goes, cup, mommy, cup. We respond immediately, oh yeah, there's the cup that has a Frozen theme and I see Elsa on there. So those three things alone don't cost any money. They're very easy to incorporate into our daily routine and they work really, really well.
That is great to know, because of course in just behavior and in just the way we treat anyone and children, being responsive is an important part of it from kind of an emotional standpoint. And you're saying that behavioral reinforcer is helping them learn language and stay on track there.
Yeah, exactly. It really is as easy as that. Now, that's not a guarantee that the child is going to be class valedictorian, but again, just that prompt response, like right away. And the research in Sweden that was done a couple of years ago looked at 1.5-year-olds, and these were typically developing children. These were not kids with a speech or language problem. And we had group A and group B. In group A, the parents responded after a delay. And then in group B, the parents responded right away. And in group B, with the immediate response, they found that those children's language development was quite a bit higher in terms of saying more words and putting sentences together faster. So yeah, the research has been very consistent.
And of course, you're not suggesting that means give in to the child's request necessarily. You can say, yeah, it's a cup, and you're not going to get it right now.
Yeah.
That's, the timing is what's important, not that we're just granting all their wishes.
Right. Yeah, it's the timing, exactly. And one of the things, there's a really good book out there called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and How to Listen So Kids Will Talk. I bet you're familiar with that.
That's my favorite.
And, I love that. That's funny. I love that book. And as a mother, it's so funny, James, because I hope my students aren't watching this, but the things I learned as a mother have been very helpful to me as a professor. So from that book that we can give kids things in theory with sympathy. And so let's say that this is a cup of, or let's say that this is like ice cream. Mommy, I want ice cream. Oh, I know you want ice cream. It's a hot day. That would taste so good right now. But we need to wait till after dinner. So I have found that to be really effective, is sympathizing with what kids want, acknowledging that desire and still holding the boundary. Yeah, that's real magic there.
Yeah, that's a game changer.
Yeah.
Or even maybe you're stuck in the car driving and I want ice cream. What kind of ice cream? Chocolate. Oh, what would you do? Why chocolate? Would you put this and that on it? And you can, next thing you know, you're telling a story about all the people they would want to share sprinkles with, and it's not about let's pull over and get ice cream right now. It's a conversation. It's got the responsiveness. It soothes their need for just thinking about ice cream. That might be what they were going for, and solves a lot of problems.
Yeah, and we know that with small children, distracting them is the best thing. especially ages like 1, 2, and 3. If we can possibly distract them and refocus their attention, that can avoid a lot of battles. It's not always possible to do it, but I've really found that as a mother and working with little kids is when I see that tantrum coming on or just the behavior to, if I can, obviously this is not in the car, but sort of switch settings, get them to focus on something else can be really helpful.
And do you have a favorite tool or trick or technique for a 3-year-old, let's say?
Yes, I saw what you sent me, blowing bubbles is kind of fun. My favorite one is 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. That's what I like to use. That really worked with my son and it works well with kids. Oh, James, come over here, honey. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. It's short, it's rhyming, and even the um, most special neediest child can obey that.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I like that it rhymes, and you can say it in a sweet tone or a firm tone, dependent.
Mhm.
Mm. It doesn't have any built-in connotation of
No,
right or wrong or anything.
exactly. And speaking of right or wrong, it's interesting as I was getting ready for this, and you're an expert in child development, so you have probably done even more reading than I have. But what I really found, that one of the questions was, what's something we want parents to avoid, and speech pathologists and professors, all of us, is getting angry doesn't work. And boy, when I learned about that, that was really a game changer. So I see a lot of parents, let's say the 3-year-old is going and grabbing the ice cream anyway. Hey, stop that, I said no. And they get really furious and they wonder why that's ineffective. Anger doesn't work, consequences do. So this, it was a long time ago. My son was born in 1997. Okay, so I had cassette tapes in my car, and he would get in there when I wasn't looking and just unspool them, and so he was wrecking my tapes.
Yeah.
So rather, he loved Shania Twain back in the day. So I picked him up from preschool, and I was driving him home, and he goes, "Shania Twain, mommy, Shania Twain." I said, "Honey, you broke it. It's all gone." Yeah, all gone. You broke it. Sorry. And I didn't get mad. I didn't make him a bad boy or judge his character, but he never did it again. And I think if I see any weakness in a lot of parents, it's giving in or getting mad when that doesn't, and then they're very frustrated. But it's the consequences that work. There was a wonderful story that you might have read in a book. It was talking about when we're driving, if we're speeding, right, in a 40-mile zone, we're going 65 miles an hour, and there's a cop standing there, and she is furious. She's yelling at us to slow down, telling us that we're not safe, but she can't do anything. We're just going to keep going. Now, another situation, we're speeding and that police car pulls up behind us with a flashing light. The officer's calm and courteous, and our hearts are pounding out of our chest. Why? Because we know there's going to be consequences. So that's just a really big thing. Even with kids with special needs, maybe we need to talk more slowly. Maybe we need to repeat it once or twice. Maybe we need to work harder to get children's attention. But even kids with special needs can learn about consequences. So that's a huge thing that I think parents and professionals can keep working to get better at.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you on that. Just being mindful of our emotional state. I find that, you know, we also don't want to be robots, and we don't. It's easy to get kind of lumped into, well, oh, you're just a behaviorist person that, you know, treats them like animals or whatever. But modulating our emotions, and I was just going to say that I find that being kind of disappointed, or like, I can show that I'm bothered by it without projecting anger towards someone else. Like, I find that that's a good medium. I can be disappointed that we're not going to go to the park because of this or that, or whatever behavior I'm seeing, without shaming, blaming, and yelling.
I totally agree. And it's, of course, as you well know, about sending I messages. I feel
Right.
very disappointed that you did X, Y, and Z. And I do that as a speech pathologist, especially in groups of kids. So I'm playing, it might have been like let's just say Candyland. There was a group of 3 or 4 kids. And this one little second grade girl from a very difficult home upended the game and pieces flew all over the room. And I said, hey, I did not like that, Rosita. I feel very angry that you did that. Please pick up those game pieces right now. And so she did it. And I said, there won't be a sticker today. But when you come back on Thursday, if you have better behavior and you act more polite in Miss Celeste's speech room, then I'll give you a sticker. So what did I just say? So I will I never shout or get angry, but when it's hard. Here's what's so weird is that the children I've had to do that with kind of speak a little more loudly, get a little more in their face. They love me. It's crazy. When they see me a week later, they'll run up and give me a hug, and you would think that they would hate my guts. But they know that I love them because I care enough to set boundaries on them. So yeah, so sending iMessages is fine. Maybe using a little stronger of a tone without yelling, and certainly not hitting. We know that.
Sure.
Yeah.
You have experience with families that are using multiple languages in the home. Can you give a brief? Is there such a thing as too many languages?
Okay, what a good question. No, there isn't. I've done tons of research on this, but no. In most of the world, as we know, people speak at least 2 languages. In the Philippines, where I was raised, we all speak 3 or 4 languages. So no, I don't think there's such a thing. Being bilingual or trilingual is really, really an asset in the job market, obviously. And it's really good for cognitive skills, for linguistic skills. So yeah, in my opinion, the more languages, the better.
So you wouldn't suggest that, let's say there's a family and they do have 3 different languages being used around the home. You wouldn't suggest that they really, really focus and just kind of pick one.
Again, I get this question everywhere I go. Yeah, so very, very common. No, research has shown that children, even those with special needs, are really able to pick up, like even if they have, say, Down syndrome, autism spectrum disorder, we don't need to limit it to just one language. They can hear and comprehend multiple languages. So a very fast story, a former student of mine, Diana, is Mexican, and her younger brother was born in California. The speech language pathologist said, don't expose him to Spanish. It'll confuse him. He just needs to speak English, right? Very bad advice that I live to prevent. Well, then they visited Mexico when he was, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old. And she said he quickly picked up on Spanish and was joking around in Spanish, even with Down syndrome. So yeah, we don't need to restrict it to one language. These children, both typically developing and special needs, are capable of learning multiple languages. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess when you think about the gifts that children have, the skills, the talents, their ability to acquire language, I mean, they can pretty much learn and master a language in 2 or 3 years, and they're barely tying their shoes.
Yeah.
So their ability to do that is almost, we can hardly comprehend, I think, how that processing works and how much storage space, if you will, is in there for language.
Yeah, they're capable of a lot more than we realize, and that's what research today is showing. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to sharing that information with my friends who are concerned that they need to use fewer languages around their kids. And
tell them, whatever they speak, Punjabi, Tagalog, Spanish, whatever it is, bring it on. What I tell parents is speak to the child in the language you are most comfortable in. So if the parent speaks fluent Vietnamese and not very much English, speak to the child in Vietnamese, let the schools work on English, because what a lot of times, James, schools will tell parents, okay, speak only English, right? Not Vietnamese, because it'll confuse the child. Well, what that child then hears is a really broken model of English. It's not grammatical, it's not rich. And so that's what the child imitates, and that's a huge disadvantage to them. So they need to be spoken to in whatever language the parent is most comfortable in. And mom can speak Spanish and dad can speak Russian. It's fine.
Great.
Yeah, whatever they want
Yeah.
to do.
No upper limit on that we know of, huh? For the
No upper limit.
right. Great. Um, you mentioned a few of your favorite resources already. Do you have any others that you'd like to put out there? And then we'll talk about your stuff, of course.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind, James, before I do that, there was one other thing I was
Sure.
burning to say.
Yeah.
And this is as a speech pathologist, as a mother, for getting kids to cooperate. And that is, we know that what children seek is attention. And if they're not getting any, they will act up to get it. We know that. So something that really helped me as a parent with my son, who again was very strong-willed and had a lot of special needs, was to catch him being good. So he was in karate, and they had this assignment called acts of kindness. And so basically, I would say stuff to my son when he was around 9, like, let's say that he spontaneously took his plate off the table and brought it to the kitchen. I go, you know what, Mark, I really appreciate that you remember to do that. And so I would catch him being good, and he really turned a corner. And I think that for a lot of us as caregivers, we're so stressed out, we're so preoccupied that we only attend to kids when their behavior isn't good. That will bring on more of it. So catch them being good, and and then really reinforce that. Okay, so this is a wonderful book. I will tell you, the authors are Christians, and so it is a distinctly Christian, Bible-oriented book. And then this is a really wonderful book by Paul Tough called Helping Children Succeed. Excellent, excellent, where he talks about some of the things you did, James, with love and boundaries and consequences. This is a phenomenal book. And then the other one, which I'm sure you've heard of, is The 5 Love Languages of Children.
Yeah.
That's a really nice one, so that we can basically kind of cater to our children where they are. So those would be some of those resources. And then the one book that I don't have anymore because I loaned it to a friend who kept it, there's a book called Setting Limits with Your Strong-Willed Child by Rob McKenzie. That book transformed my life. A friend put it into my hands when my son was 3, and I was having a lot of problems with them. And I read that book. I started implementing it. He's 22. We have a great relationship because what I did was I grabbed the reins and started being a parent and giving consequences and boundaries, and it just changed our lives. So again, Setting Limits with Your Strong-Willed Child by Rob McKenzie, phenomenal book.
That's great. Thank you for that.
Sure.
You've done a lot of work with book drives. You have your own books. You've got a couple of websites. Tell us about where we can find you online and which of those projects is we can help out with or check out.
Well, thank you so much. So my website is lovetalkread.com, all lowercase, again, lovetalkread.com. And on there, I have a lot of suggestions for developing speech and language and fine motor skills of children, because my son had a lot of trouble with that. The book, of course, has a lot of that, and this is available on Amazon. And then, James, I do need to send you a copy, like we said, get your address later. So that is something. And I'm also on Instagram at Love Talk Read, and I try to post almost every day something about, speech and language tips for boosting children's language, especially right now during this season of the pandemic. Easy things that parents can do at home that are cheap or completely free and that you can just work in. So at Love Talk Read, my Instagram, and lovetalkread.com. And I'm also on Facebook as Love Talk Read. So those would be the resources, especially Instagram and the website, where people could get free information.
Great.
To help their kids.
Great. And the book drive stuff, can you just tell me more about that? Are you doing actively book drives now, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in 2008, one of my graduate students was doing a thesis, and I wanted children's books for her. So I just kind of put it out there among my students, I'm collecting children's books. And my students said, well, what's your goal? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, 500. And it felt so outrageous that I actually went out and bought the first 60 books myself. And James, earlier this year, 2020, we passed 250,000 collected and donated. So I don't take money from people, and I will always emphasize that I can't accept money because I'm not a charitable nonprofit, but I just kind of put the word out to my students, my friends, my family, my neighbors. I use social media a lot. I put something on my own personal Facebook page, which is Celeste Roseberry, and I got about 1,000 books from that. So I've been doling those out, especially as summer is starting and kids don't have reading. Kids in poverty don't have stuff to read. So on my lovetalkread.com website, there are specific suggestions for how people can start their own book drive. It's easy and it's so much fun. And it's just been a real blessing to be able to share with kids. And we've donated in over 40 countries around the world as well.
That's great. That's great. Are people starting their own book drives in those countries, or are you shipping them around the world?
I don't have the money to ship them. It's really expensive. So I'm going to confess that the way I do that is I either take the books myself when I travel, or I find someone who's going to a country and I ask them to
Beautiful.
put books in their suitcase. So that's kind of how I've gotten that out there. Yeah,
I love it.
not being a business, I can't afford the shipping, but I give them to people who are traveling. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless you can fill a whole freight container of them, the shipping's a little exorbitant.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I sent one book to India and it was like $42. I'm like, okay, I don't think I can afford to do this. Shipping in the US is a lot cheaper.
Sure. Yes. I'm sure. And they may have appreciated the $42 more. I don't know. But
Yeah,
it's a
probably.
beautiful gesture. Um, and just on a personal note, do you still visit Philippines, or do you have friends and connections there still?
I haven't gone back. I graduated from high school in Manila at Faith Academy, a boarding school for missionary kids. And then when we came back to the States, I was 17. I'm the oldest of four girls. I was 17 and I started college here. And I have not been back there. I really love to go. Truthfully, James, just it's such a beautiful country with wonderful people. I know that they're having even more problems today than when I was growing up there. And it makes me so sad. And maybe this is not very mature, but I kind of like holding on to the memories I have of the way it was. So someday I'm going to work up my nerve and go there. But I haven't been back,
Me
no.
too. We'll go together.
Oh, there we go.
It looks like a beautiful place. That the people there just seem wonderful. So that's
James,
why I was asking.
where all of you traveled to?
Nowhere. No.
Yeah.
I haven't done really much traveling at all. But I'm ready to.
Yeah, when we can fly again, right?
Right. Hopefully well, the cost will probably skyrocket once everybody can do it again.
Oh,
Uh, do you have any parting thoughts? Anything you'd like to say that we didn't cover while we were talking before we say goodbye?
okay. Let's see. Um, I don't think so. I really appreciated the opportunity and the privilege of being here. Um, Yeah, I guess the parting shot that I've already talked about is love and boundaries. That would be the really big thing. But yeah, kids are resilient, and if they get those two things, it's interesting. I will part with this. So my son was a surprise. So when I found out I was pregnant, I read all kinds of books, and there was some interesting research that Paul Tuff talks about. And what they did was they looked at kids from all kinds of backgrounds, abuse, domestic violence, substance abuse in the home, and all of that. And what they found as they tracked these babies into their 20s, and then they looked at them as young adults, was that young adults who had received the most physical affection as children were the happiest, the most stable, and the most productive, even in the face of very, very difficult homes. So I would just say that, especially when our kids are little, the more physical love and affection we can give them, the better, because that sets the stage for a lot of success to follow. And then my son, very, very quickly, his name is Mark, and he permits me to share his story. So as I said, he was diagnosed in kindergarten, first grade with dyslexia, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, which is another whole thing. So he had tutoring, occupational therapy, vision therapy, horseback riding, you name it. And with the suggestions that I'm giving you and all of the ideas, Mark got accepted to Oxford University for a master's program, and he'll be attending in the fall.
Bravo.
So I want to put hope out there that even if the child does have a lot of special needs, that if we can follow some of these steps, that the future can be a lot brighter than we think.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, Celeste, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you, James. It's really been great to talk to you. And if you'll email me with the best address for you, I'll get a couple of copies of my book to you. But thank you for this opportunity. I really enjoyed talking with you.
All right. And we'll share all the links, of course, and hopefully send some people your way. And really appreciate it again.
Thank you.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for being here. My name's James. This has been Celeste Roseberry-McKibbin. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.